This ship chat was requested by Navark Rella. So this is the Avenger class. It's called a battle cruiser. I'm not so sure of that definition. We'll get into that in due course. This is a ship from Star Trek Online, and it's quite a popular one, and one of their original designs. As you well know, I was going to originally merge this ship chat into a ship chat about the Inquiry, but that was frankly an injustice to the Avenger. The Avenger does not deserve to be put next to that absolute mess of a ship. The Avenger is based off the same concept art, from what I can tell. It was for a Star Trek Online game that was not Star Trek Online, predecessor to Star Trek Online, and this piece of concept art was called the Archer class. And you can see there, the relation between both it and the Avenger, and of course the Inquiry. In fact, the Inquiry is probably closer to the concept art itself. They're related, they share DNA, but these are not directly linked, I don't think. These are actually quite separate designs, built for separate purposes at separate times. Avenger really develops the Archer class concept and also takes it in its own 25th century direction, and it's very distinctly a ship of the 25th century and blends in with other ships of Star Trek Online, so that the Starfleet of that period is actually quite cohesive as well. So in any case, let's just dive into it. Let's dive into it in universe, because I don't have a whole hell of a lot in the way of production notes. In universe, it was, yes, developed from the Inquiry in a sort of tangential offshoot way. The Inquiry was designed to be built very quickly to bring the fleet back up to strength and incorporate a level of modularity, as well as some of the new innovations in survivability. It took a lot of DNA from both the Nova class and the Intrepid class. Now, as we enter the 25th century, tensions with the Klingons began to escalate for whatever reason. This time, war was anticipated, and of course, what do the Klingons have lots of? Well, ever since the Dominion War, the Klingons have been big on having large numbers of small, maneuverable attack ships, so this is a threat that the Federation are going to have to deal with. And so they develop the Avenger class in order to counter large numbers of smaller, faster Klingon ships. In that respect, it also takes a lot of DNA from the Defiant, and we'll again see this when we go into the tactical systems and defences, quite how much Defiant DNA there is in there, though of course structurally, as I say, it's very similar to the Intrepid and the Nova. Now also, a part of the reason it was introduced was not only to simply fight the Klingons, it was also because at the same time, Starfleet was going to be launching the Odyssey class, which is a gigantic explorer dreadnought. This is a big battleship, and a ship that big is going to be incredibly vulnerable to smaller attack craft, and so it's going to need a fleet escort. For that role, you now have the Avenger. What we have here as a design is a very compact and maneuverable ship. It's like the Nova and the Defiant had a baby, and then the baby grew up, got to its teenage years, and decided it would look like the Odyssey. It's a very strained metaphor, but that's basically what's going on here. Now, it's described as a battle cruiser. Now, at 390 meters, which was roughly my estimate, that's not really big enough to be a battle cruiser. There's a couple of definitions you could extend to it. You could call it a light cruiser. That's not really fair. Light cruisers are generally lightened variants of a larger cruiser model. For example, the Consular class is a light cruiser variant of the Ambassador class. So I don't think that's fair to call it a light cruiser. I would either call it a heavy frigate, because it's just a little bit oversized to be a frigate. The cutoff for frigate is about 350 meters, so it's just crept over into cruiser territory, but we could still call it a heavy frigate. Or we could call it an attack cruiser. And given how much Defiant DNA there is in there, it would actually make a lot of sense. You know, when we talk about the Vorcha, the Klingon Vorcha class, why is it called an attack cruiser? Well, partially it's because it's incorporating bird of prey DNA into a capital ship design. It's taking aspects of a bird of prey, you know, that sort of very heavy frontal armament and incorporating it into a larger cruiser-style design. And in much the same way, we're taking the Defiant class and incorporating that into a larger cruiser design. So in this respect, you may well want to call the Avenger class a Federation attack cruiser. And as I say, it's about 390 meters long, which puts it bigger than the Intrepid and smaller than the Moog class, which would be created to engage it. Its main armament is 7 pulse phaser cannons. Now, these can be swapped out for additional photon torpedo launchers. Most captains will keep them as pulse phasers. The 2 outermost pairs will generally be used as the long range, so that they can reach out and engage at slightly further distances than the original pulse phasers, while the 3 in the nose are just straight up pulse phasers, not all that different from what the Defiant was using nearly 40 years ago. It also has 15 phaser arrays, with 2 arrays on the warp nacelles, which is an interesting carry-through from the Venture refit of the Galaxy class. It's interesting that they kept that aspect of the design. It also comes with, as base, 2 photon torpedo tubes, one fore, one aft. Nothing really to write home about there, though of course, 25th century, you can of course equip these with quantum torpedoes and all sorts of other exciting things, possibly transphasic if you're a very, very good boy, as far as Starfleet Command is concerned, but quantum and photon torpedoes for the most part. As impressive as that armament is, it's actually kind of dwarfed or overshadowed by the protection this thing has. This is really what makes the Avenger unique, is the level of emphasis that's given to protection. It is, of course, up-to-date modern level of shielding, which is pretty potent, and you need pretty robust shields in the 25th century. It also has Generation 2 ablative armor. Similar principle to Generation 1 ablative armor, but a little bit more advanced. You've also got the black areas, which is where the armor has been reinforced, and these have been calculated to be the areas of greatest impact. So this is where the enemy is most likely to shoot at. It also has deployable armor. This protects the warp nacelles and the deflector dish and all the various squishy bits of the starship that you don't want the enemy shooting at. And this is another feature that the Avenger pioneered. It's also interesting, it carries through some DNA from the Akira, just in a very small way, in that you have the 2 neck pylons actually kind of flow up onto the top of the saucer and actually create just a small barrier that stops the bridge from being shot at from the port and starboard. It's just a very small detail, but it's something that both the Steamrunner and the Akira did. They just slightly recessed their bridges into larger pieces of superstructure. Their bridges are still visible and they still have a bridge dome, but it's just a little bit harder to hit from certain angles. And then the other thing to mention, of course, as you work back from that, is it has a double neck. There is a small design flaw with double necks, and that is that if you have windows on the inside of each neck, it means that people are going to be able to look into other people's quarters. That's just where they put all the sex perverts. I think it's important to emphasize, this is not to allow the Avenger to tank damage, but these are sometimes little design decisions that are there to allow them to have a margin of error. You know, you can have your shields be drained, and okay, once your shields are down, you should be getting out of dodge, but it just gives you that second or two longer to make a decision or to, push your luck if you want to. It enables you fundamentally to hang in combat longer with a good deal of confidence that the moment your shields go down, you're not just going to be vaporized, which is quite helpful. The other thing to talk about with the Avenger is going to be the power systems. This is a very powerful ship. It mounts a similar kind of warp core to the Defiant, in which I mean an oversized warp core, and this is quite impressive. You can see where the warp core is based on the impulse crystal. It's also just interesting in and of itself that the impulse crystal continues to see use far into the future as the 25th century. So it has a very powerful, almost overpowered engine for its size. Again, that's taken from the Defiant. This engine runs hot, as you well know. And to avoid you cooking yourself, you need to have a way of venting heat. And in the case of the Avenger, you actually have 2 dorsal heat vents on the port and starboard of the bridge. Those flow up from engineering, up from the warp core, and allow the excess heat from plasma to disperse here. So you can run the Avenger very hot and really push it to its limits without blowing yourself up, which is quite handy in a pinch. It's just about squeezing that extra level of oomph out of the ship. And that allows you, again, that ability to do it. As I say, it's little things in the design like that which make the difference. It's also worth saying that we have a very interesting impulse setup. In terms of impulse engines, we've got a total of about 6. We've got 2 primary impulse engines on the port and starboard of the saucer. These are your main impulse drivers. You also have a second set of supporting impulse units right above them. And then you have a third set of impulse units in the warp pylons. Yeah, that's almost certainly actually a design that's been taken from the Romulan Neorexan class, or Valdor type, as that was the first to really pioneer the whole concept of what we'd call impulse wings, but having those kind of wide impulse vents in pylons and wing sections, and that allows you far greater maneuverability. So ultimately, the result of the Avenger class entering service is the Klingons would introduce the Moog and Kurak class in response. It was incredibly well received by Starfleet and became a very popular, I don't know if you want to call it an escort frigate, attack cruiser. It was very popular in the fleet because apart from things like the Defiant, we don't see much in the way of aggressive frigates from Starfleet. Yes, there is the New Orleans class, which is a very, that was a retrofit to get the New Orleans, the torpedo pods that made it such a formidable frigate in its day. Well, that ultimately was a retrofit. The Intrepid was very good, was never intended for combat. It was never meant to be a combat frigate. And then the other 2 combat frigates I can think of are not really frigates, in that they're not intended to go out on their own and do independent activities. Those are, of course, the Norway and the Steamrunner, both of which are what I would call fleet ships. They're not intended to operate on their own. But the Avenger is. It's also got plenty of roles that it can conduct in a fleet and is basically going to be probably the heaviest part of any skirmishing element or any picket line. And again, is a very effective, not just attack ship hunter, but destroyer hunter. If you're a small ship, you're going to be dead scared of the Avenger, and rightly so. The Avenger is arguably the reason that the era of the attack ships, that era which started off in 2372, the era of attack ship dominance, that shadow of the attack ship, the small, powerful, maneuverable ship that can operate in swarms and wolf packs against large, cumbersome ships like the Galaxy, or indeed potentially Odyssey class, and that could only be countered really effectively by other similar attack ships. But the Avenger just wipes that away. The Avenger removes the need for you to counter enemy attack ships with your own attack ships. It breaks that cycle and instead offers something that completely, doesn't eradicate the attack ship. It doesn't render the attack ship a complete obsolete relic of the past, but it knocks it off its throne. It removes the dominance that the attack ship once had in the battle space. It's quite a predatory description, isn't it? It hunting smaller enemy attack ships. And then you combine that with this look here we've got, which is a black and white ship. It's very unique. I must say that it really does actually remind me of an orca whale. It was not a very aggressive design, I suppose you could say, much like a killer whale. A killer whale is quite a fearsome predator, but we certainly don't look at them with fear in the same way that we would regard a great white shark, even though a great white shark itself is absolutely terrified of a killer whale, and perhaps much the same way we would look with fear on some kind of Klingon bird of prey or raptor, but not realizing that it itself is absolutely terrified of this very compact and almost chubby looking frigate. Its armament tells me that this is a Federation that is not afraid of war. But its design tells me that this is a Federation that does not embrace war either. It seems to represent not just a technological development, but a significant cultural development in the Federation over the past 40 years. The Federation is no longer afraid of a fight, but it won't embark on one needlessly. But if you push them, the Avenger will hunt you down, and it will kill you. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you to my members, my Navarks, Jeffrey Ballard, Tully DT, and Rella. My commanders, Miami Jules, Captain's Quarters, Chase Rector, PQSK, Philip Ty, Jeff Hallam, Bird Monster, Mark Philippe, Robert Sampson, Sean Farrell, Guillermo Martinez, Das Blas, Adam Bowman, Nathaniel Mead, DM Tribal Typhoon, Gabe Logan, and Mr. Fiegel. And I salute my Centurions, Pendlebury, BOS Domestic Disputes, Marcus Hall, Julian Arnott, Freedom Trooper, Okokatum Questo, Squadra Course, and Athes Collection. And I thank all my loyal sub-lieutenants. Thank you guys for supporting the channel, and I will see you all in the next video.